PLUGTONE audio.
Maybe you don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, 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 this time power, this time to build power, this time to build power, this time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I am your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. Today is Tuesday, December 7th, which means that tomorrow is the day that episode 1 of season 1 of Breaking Beta, the Science of Climbing podcast, drops onto all of your heads. If this is the first time you're hearing of this and you haven't figured it out already, Breaking Beta is an entirely separate podcast from the Power Company podcast, though it is brought to you by Power Company Climbing, as well as Crux Conditioning, and is part of the PLUGTONE Audio Collective. You can find the link right there in your show notes to head over there, get subscribed, make sure you don't miss an episode. My friend and fellow coach Paul Corsaro and I will be each week for 10 weeks setting the record straight on the science of climbing. We'll be digging into one paper at a time, going way beyond the abstract, into the methods, into the conclusions, into the actual things we can take from these papers, the practical applications, as well as the gross misinterpretations we hear from so many climbers. Oh, and big news, this is not the only new podcast coming from the PLUGTONE Audio Collective. We've got some exciting new podcasts coming for climbers and the outdoor industry in general. So stay tuned after this episode to hear more about what's coming down the pipeline. All right, today's episode is my good friend and fellow coach, Lauren Abernathy, who you may know on the internets as Good Spray Coaching. Lauren and I sat down at my house this past summer here in Lander, Wyoming, while she was on a trip and very much in the midst of engaging in her first real long-term project, an ambitious one that I'm really proud of her for diving into. We talk a little bit about the lessons she's learning on that project, as well as all the things she's learning from her recent switch from weekend warrior and sort of part-time climber with a full-time career into full-time coaching and having much more time to climb. We also discuss some of the effects of positioning yourself as an expert in this or really any other industry. It's always going to come with people questioning you, and that can have a big effect on your psyche while you're simultaneously trying to push yourself and exploring your own limits, not to mention being a female coach in a very male-dominated industry. All right, let's get into it.
Maybe you don't know.
I feel like a lot of coaching is not necessarily about understanding all the science or programming everything perfectly. It's about like understanding human behavior.
This time power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
How many sessions of not getting better are okay?
Man, I really haven't. My long-term projecting hasn't been.
Yeah, it's a fairly new thing.
It's a fairly new thing because I'm just now starting to have time for it. I remember having, my friend calls them regression sessions where you get worse. And he asked me, like, on a previous project, he was like, you had a regression session yet? And I was like, oh, yeah. I feel like 2 or 3 in a row would probably be a rule of thumb, but I've had 5 on the one I'm doing now, and every time it's not like, you know, it's like new links and it's a little bit better, and I'm like, no, it keeps getting better. We should keep going.
Well, I think one of the coolest things too, once you really start digging into big long-term projects, is you get really good at finding the tiny progressions because you really want to keep climbing on it, and you've made this rule of like 2 or 3 sessions without progress means I'm done. So you find the tiniest little things to keep yourself going, you know? And actually, I think that's very cool because then you can apply that level of awareness to things faster in the future.
Yeah.
You know?
Plus, it really depends on the time scale. Like, if you have a lot of time, maybe it's just you're stressed at work one week or whatever's going on.
Right.
So you're just having a bunch of, or there's a gigantic line, so you only get to have like 1 or 2 burns on it. And then you're like, oh, this session sucked. And it's like, okay, well, if you had more burns, it might not have sucked or whatever. So, yeah. I guess it all depends on the time scale, too. But yeah, I'm still in the land of like, a whole 6 to 8 weeks feels like forever, and that's like not even long.
Totally. Totally. And that's something I wanted to talk about a little bit was like you were historically weekend warrior, short trips to places, living in the city, you know, traveling a bunch to climb. Now you're in this position where you could pretty much go climbing every day if you wanted to.
Yeah.
What are the biggest challenges for you switching from weekend warrior mode to this mode that you're in now? Because I personally found it pretty challenging.
It's definitely hard. And also because I don't have, like, first of all, it can be hard to make the time because when you run your own thing, like, you know, I went from like the 9 to 5 where I'm like, someone else is making the rules for me. Now I'm going to make my own rules. I'm going to go climbing. My training's going to be perfect. I'm going to eat breakfast every day. And I'm going to make a good breakfast. And like, that is not happening. Like, it's not like that at all. But yeah, it's kind of this weird thing where you like are, you know, when you actually love what you do and are like excited about what you're doing, then it's really easy to kind of like overdo it on that end and then not actually make the time for climbing, which is kind of funny. But then at the same time, it's been cool to have the space to be able to like try things longer term and also get out of like, I don't want to say it's like panic mode, but you know, when you're like, this is the only time I had, like, this was the one of the 2 weekends I had in this 6 weeks, and now it's pouring rain and I can't go. Yeah. And also, I'm speaking of one weekend in specific where also my other half chopped off his fingertips, cutting an avocado, making guacamole. And I was like, between the pouring rain and you not having a fingertip, we're not going rock climbing. And now I won't get to climb outside for a month and I've been training my butt off. And it's really nice to not have that like level of insane constraints anymore.
Yeah.
It's a lot less stressful.
when you're climbing in the Red or, you know, Rumney or any of those kinds of zones where the season is pretty specific and is like 2 months are the good season.
Yeah.
That might mean as a weekend warrior, you get 8 trips. Yep. You know?
You're like, I have 2 months to send whatever. And then you're like, that's not that many.
Right. And if 2 of those trips go bad because of the weather or because of someone cuts their fingertip off or whatever, you know, that's a quarter of your climbing season gone.
Yeah. And you put all this work in over the summer, like hours and hours of training in the gym, dreaming of like your 10 days you get to spend. It's so hard. I definitely feel for everyone that is still in that position. Like, it is a hard place to be when you care a lot about getting better at climbing rocks.
It is. And in some ways it like forces you into this mode of preparation that works really well. And you're like, you go to the crag and you're determined and it, you know, you're super tactical and super efficient and effective. And then it's really easy to get lazy when you live near the crag and you're like, oh, I can go tomorrow.
Oh, totally. I've definitely noticed, like, that's why I'm still going on these like short 6-week trips throughout the year, which that's part of the reason why I left all this, so that I could have control of my schedule and do this. But
you also just said short 6-week trip.
Yeah, right? Weird, right?
Right.
It's a whole new perspective now. Well, I'm also like, I need more time to send my project, so I want this to be 12 weeks long so I can send. Yeah. It's weird. It's a whole new ball game. But yeah, I like the trips though, because it's definitely forcing me to be like, you got to get it done. There's a timeline. Because I did notice when I was in Salt Lake, you know, like locally, so I moved to Salt Lake in January, and then I did a lot of skiing because skiing's a big thing for me. But, you know, all spring I was like, I'll just keep exploring, which I think is valid as well because I'm just not used to like the climbing there. But yeah, then I I wouldn't say too much done. I don't really regret any of it. Like I needed to figure out the areas and just like climb on a bunch of stuff and like didn't send a lot. But yeah, it's totally a thing where you're like, yep, I could just come back Tuesday or we'll figure it out next week. But like the shorter trips are making it so I kind of have to get her done. And like there's a timeline, which is nice and hard, but good.
It's interesting. Do you feel pressure? Because you really only live 4 hours away.
I guess. I mean,
How far were you driving for climbing trips when you were a weekend warrior?
I was driving 6 hours round trip to Rumney, New Hampshire. So, and we kind of figured out the New York City traffic was really bad on Friday evenings. So we did this cool thing where we would wake up at 4,
Right.
drive there, show up at 10, and just be kind of confused about what time it's supposed to be, because usually I don't get up at 4 in the morning because it's awful. And then, you know, we would be there for like a little over 24 hours and then have to drive back on Sunday. And now you're right. I do live 4 hours away. I guess I'm like, gotta be in Ohio for a bunch
and
of
you
weddings.
Can work remotely.
Yeah.
And,
I can make it happen if I need to. But it does feel like, you know, we're leaving on this date and it's gotta be done. But I really can come back. I keep reminding myself, I'm like, if you need to come back in September, it's okay. But yeah.
I think there's an interesting line there where it like can be to your benefit to put that time limit on it.
Yeah.
And to say, I need to have it done by this day, you know?
Yeah. But it's also this thing where, you know, I am going to be in the red in October. And at the same time, I'm like, well, I don't want to just like let this thing bleed into forever, not get any quality training in, and then show up to the red. Like, okay, just for everyone's reference, I am not ready to get pumped on 100-foot rock climbs right now. I'm projecting a 50-foot boulder problem that's real hard, and I am not ready to be pumped. So I know, like, September, I'm going to have to get my head in the game and start getting really pumped in the gym, which will be a good time. But yeah, it's kind of this thing where I'm like, I don't want to just like half-ass 2 things and then not be ready. So it's kind of like, yeah, I definitely like schedule myself out a lot to try to do a lot of things and try to make it like this nice plan. It doesn't always work out, but
yeah, I think it's a smart thing to do though. I actually like that you're experimenting inside this new like paradigm that you're in, because I see some coaches who are kind of like set in their way of engaging with rock climbing. Like, this is the time I put into it. This is when I go rock climbing. And that sort of colors their view of how everyone else engages with it. You're expanding your view. And I think it's important to understand the struggles, the challenges, you know, and the benefits of having different schedules, or schedules you can manipulate, or being a weekend warrior, or having all this time and all these crags available where you could get trapped into sampling everything. Understanding all that and having struggled with it yourself, I think, is really important.
Totally. And it's been really cool the past year because, you know, when I started my kind of coaching business, I did end up having a lot of people that were more East Coast. So I'm like, I understand your seasons. I understand all this stuff. And then for my, you know, out West clients that are telling me, I'm having a really hard time getting in the gym because there's 1,000 fun activities for me to do outdoors with my friends, including climbing literally every day after work. And I just didn't have a concept for how this could happen. I'm like, yeah, but you just got to get your training done, man. Like, I don't know. And then I get out to Salt Lake and I'm like, I can ski every day.
Right. Yeah.
Like I worked with Coach Blake from the Power Company over the winter, and I remember looking at my own training calendar and just how many rest days I was taking and thinking, if I was my own athlete, I'd be really stressing me out right now.
Yeah.
But it's hard. So it's been cool to like gain that perspective so that I can like help athletes in a lot of different, you know, areas and situations understand how to manage it from personal emotional experience with all of them. So
yeah, I think it's huge. Are there things you miss from the corporate life and weekend warrior style climbing? Are there things you wish were still a part of your rock climbing, or are you keeping those things?
I will say, I guess there's 2 things. One of them is that when my only time engaging with training for rock climbing or rock climbing was like my spare time. It was fun to just dig into tons of information and write my own training plans and spend way too much time writing my own training plans. But like that was like, a hobby. And then I would write my blog posts about it. And like that was a good time. And now that like writing training plans is my job, I'm like, no, it's going to be a no for me, dog. I'm getting a coach. Like I cannot do this myself anymore, which is fine. But I also think I learn a ton from like working with other coaches and like learning from them as well personally. And also understanding, I'm starting a business and I've never even been a client before. Like that doesn't work. I need to understand what it's like to be on the other side of it. Yeah. So that was important. So maybe I miss it a little bit. I guess I could still do it myself, but I just know I won't. And also making myself get pumped in the gym is not going to happen unless there's another person on the end telling me to
someone
do it.
forcing you into the situation.
Someone that's like, so you're going to do this? And I'll be like, yep. Yes, I am. I will do it because you said so, but I couldn't make me do it. So.
Only because you put it on my calendar.
Yep, exactly. So there's that. And then I think part of me I don't miss disliking my work. But when you do, in some ways, not really care that much about your job, and it's just like a paycheck. I mean, I cared in the sense that I like to do a good job with things.
Right.
But also, when you don't really care, it's pretty easy to go out to the crag and be like, shutting that off for the weekend. That's not getting thought about. I am not thinking about any of this garbage until Monday. And when you run your own thing, it's really, but also it's fun. But I'm also like, it's hard. It's a lot harder to turn work off, especially for the weekend. That's what I've been working on, is like not working every single day. I'm like, having days off is good. So yeah, those are like the two things I think I miss the most, but everything else is awesome.
Yeah. I tell people all the time that my life would be so much like logistically, emotionally, mentally simpler if I just worked a 9-to-5 again.
Totally.
And had somebody tell me what to do at work, and I didn't have to think about that at all. It was nice. That's one of the things I would love to somehow bring in. It'll never happen, and I'm actually fine with that. I've made that compromise, know. I would love to be able to only focus on my own rock climbing for a little while. Won't ever happen again, and that's fine. Yep. Because I spent a lot of years doing it. The other thing that I wish I could recreate is that when I was in Cincinnati training, everybody was on the same schedule. Because there's the Red River season, it's very defined, and then you have a training season where you're all in the gym all the time. And having that crew of psyched people was very cool. Yeah. And I love having that sort of community. And I've tried to build it here a little bit, but because of the fact that you can climb year round and people's goals are constantly changing to fit the season, everyone just ends up scattered to some degree. Yeah. So it's a little harder to have that intentional community of people who are psyched to chase their goals in a similar way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like because when I was in New Jersey for a couple of years, it was like Mike and I made friends, so that was good. But it was kind of hard because a lot of people at the gym, it's a 6-hour drive. Most people, right? Especially if you haven't climbed outside before, you're not like, oh, let me just drive 6 hours to do that. Also, everyone's going to come for me. I am aware the gunks are closer, but I don't trad climb, so leave me alone. But yeah, I always get that pushback. They're like, you didn't have to drive that far. There's always the gunks. And I'm like, well, I don't really boulder and I don't really trad climb, so I'm going sport climbing, people. But yeah, so that was hard because it was kind of hard to make friends because most young adults in their 20s like do stuff like brunch on the weekends in the city. And I was like, we'll be gone literally every weekend in the fall. So like the friend making, we made friends at the gym, but if you weren't going to come rock climbing with us on the weekends, then I guess we'll just make random friends at the crag. But it was hard. So moving to Salt Lake, it's kind of funny. I have a bunch of friends. I've jokingly called it the post ski team frat house for a few years, but like a lot of my friends from Ohio State that were on the ski team, they graduated and everyone somehow found a big kid job and they all moved into this house in Salt Lake City. So it's like this crew of people that I like loved skiing with. We went climbing a bunch in college and I was like, my climbing crew's in Salt Lake. So now that I moved back, I have I have a squad, and it's not just me and Mike going, I wish we could make friends.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's been cool to have that. And not everyone's like on the same training grind or anything, but we're all like very close levels. So yeah, it's been cool because we all will kind of pick out a rock climb, and we're all super different heights and have different strengths, but we're like, this rock climb looks sweet. And now I like feel like I have a crew instead of not, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, that's really important to have. I'm glad you have that there.
Yeah.
It's really easy to get sucked into your own world and then realize down the road that there's this thing that is missing from the recipe, you know?
Yeah, like making friends is important, Lauren. Jeez. Like, come on.
So, well, I need that advice a lot of the time, too. I'm really much better at making enemies than I am at making friends. And I appreciate enemies just as much as I appreciate most of my friends. So, another thing I think is cool about what you're doing, and this sort of goes along with the like experiencing all of the different, aspects, the way different people engage with climbing, and being able to understand that, and just that instead of just saying, oh, well, why don't you just not go outside this weekend? Because it sounds really simple when you say it, but putting yourself in that experience, you learn that it's something different. I see, basically, I'm going to do what I do in the board meetings, and we're just going to talk about mistakes that I see here.
I'm ready. I'm psyched.
And then you
Let's
can
go.
talk to me about your perspective from it. Nate, actually, yesterday, we were throwing out board meeting topics, and he's like, or we could talk about something positive. And I'm like,
no.
What are you talking about?
Absolutely not.
We don't do that here. Something I see happening a lot, especially like you're part of this influx of climbing coaches.
Yeah.
Which I think is very cool. And I'm excited to have there and have different experiences and perspectives coming into it. One of the things I see that makes me a little nervous for people is that they spend a lot of time on continuing education, doing these courses, learning new things, paying attention to the science. But then what happens is they stop learning from their clients who are the people out there in the field actually experiencing the thing.
Yeah.
Whereas the people in the labs doing the studies, or if you're, taking a class from some other vocation who has no idea about climbers, those people don't have a clue what's happening out and with climbers in the real world,
Yeah.
What have you learned from your clients now that you're experiencing these new things and you're working with people all over the place? You've got clients worldwide. So what are you learning from them that might have been unexpected for you?
Yeah, I guess like going into coaching, and I think I can see why people want to go the path of continuing education a lot.
Totally. I don't think it's a bad thing.
No, not at all. And I think in my own journey of it, I was so nervous to just start coaching people. It's kind of, who am I? I'm just some guy that likes thinking about climbing training a lot,
Right.
So how do you even get there? And then it helps to like have some kind of continuing education that's like, you did a thing, you have learned, you can now safely talk to people, understand if their medications are going to interfere with whatever, like all the like baseline stuff. But then you kind of just got to start coaching people and figure out what works. If you have some session or something you program and then everyone asks the same question, you start learning, whenever you give this to someone, you're going to go ahead and say these few things, and then it'll like clear it up. So I think it's a lot of, I'm going off topic, but I guess it's a lot of realizing that like talking to your clients about it and seeing what's working for people has ultimately been, like, getting the experience has absolutely been more important than a lot of the continuing education courses, which makes sense. It's kind of the practice in the field.
Do you ever find yourself struggling with like, I learned this, science has said this in some way, but then this thing that works for my client contradicts this thing that I've learned in some way, and I'm trying to make sense of it. Do you ever find yourself in that place?
I feel like yeah, and this is kind of where I was going to. I feel like a lot of coaching is not necessarily about understanding all the science or programming everything perfectly. It's about like understanding human behavior.
Totally.
And usually my philosophy is very much, if we can do the thing that's like 70% of what the science might ask you to do, but it's a lot more convenient, accessible, less confusing, and less annoying, then you're just going to actually do it over your 12 weeks of working with me, instead of being like, read a lot of words like alactic. I don't think I'm going to do that.
Right.
I think that's usually where I net out with these things, where I kind of know like consistency over everything is what's going to work. So if we can get you doing something that you'll actually do that's more sustainable, like, yes, of course, it'd be great if you could do like these whatever sessions and that whatever, but you know, if you hone down the science and like take the important stuff and not be perfectionist about it, that's usually where you can find a sweet spot where people actually do their sessions and enjoy it and don't just quit training. That's also always my worry, because I get a lot of people that have never trained for rock climbing before. And I'm always like, I want you to get better, but I also kind of want you to have fun. Like, I want this to be like a good first taste of training if you've never trained before. And I don't want you to be totally turned off by it. And also I never want people to quit and then say training doesn't work. Like, that's always my worry.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want you to like it and realize that it's going to make you better. And in the end, it's probably going to help you have more fun rock climbing too. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm not like trying to down science or continuing education or any of that. It's all important.
Yeah.
And science, I think we have to look at it objectively for what science is. Like it by its nature has to strip away a lot of the variables that we all have to live with. You know, we don't have that choice. We're going to have things like work stress, family stress, chores we have to get done, house projects, our car might break down. There's all these things that come into play that don't in a laboratory research type setting. So it's not always going to apply one-to-one. So I think your advice of like, if we can take the majority of what science says or get the gist of it, then we can adjust from there.
Yep.
It's like the difference between someone who, we were just having this conversation about baking the other night, and some people are very much like, I have to follow the recipe exactly. It says do this. I have to measure it exactly to this. And other people are like, oh, well, I've baked enough that I sort of understand where they're going with it, and I can just make my own adjustments, and it'll be fine.
Yep.
And I think that's a really important place to go with actual humans,
And that's why I get so annoyed in conversations when people want to be like, but is this the best, or is this the best, or is that the best? And I'm like, I know the best is never going to happen, because you're going to get invited to a bunch of weddings, or your schedule's going to get messed up, or your boss is going to tell you got to stay late. And then the perfect, beautiful order of operations schedule that we worked out to optimize your whatever isn't going to happen because we're humans. So that's always why, like, I'll obviously engage in the conversation. I'm like, yes, we can have these exercises of whatever, but like, at the end of the day, maybe you'll end up like me and you'll pop 2 tires on the road to Lander, and your perfectly timed out like schedule of sending your project's going to get blown up. So, yeah, that's what happens. Real life is going to get in the way. Totally. You're going to go too hard one session. You're going to get too excited. You're going to do too many boulders. You're going to be tired for the next one. That's how it happens. You're going to see your friend that you haven't seen in 6 months in your weird, horribly scheduled week where this was supposed to be a hardcore session, and then you're going to it's just how it's going to be. So you just got to keep showing up and know that like you're not going to hit it perfect all the time. Yeah, I think that's super important to keep in mind. Do you not necessarily miss, but on the topic of continuing education and spending time learning, something you did really well on your blog when you and I first connected? I really loved the way you were able to take information and then synthesize it into this easy to understand format for people. And I know you have less time to do that now. Is that something that you wish you had more time for? Yeah. Because I'm just curious, because you were good at it, I'm curious how much you actually enjoyed it. I really loved it. I definitely wish I had more time. I remember I looked at my blog the other day and I was like, my God, I haven't posted a blog post since November of last year. But I think a lot of that energy of wanting to synthesize information, I've kind of started pouring that, like, just frankly from a business perspective. Like, I've noticed that, like, as much as I love the long form blog posts, like, social media tends to be a better converting thing from and it's some people like, they do not want to read a full blog post. They want to swipe through a couple informational things on Instagram. So like some of that energy in writing has been going there. And then I also, a lot of the work I've been doing lately is kind of creating these courses where I teach a lot of the weird stuff that maybe you're not going to see from, just like a basic like training thing. Like, hey, how can you set up your climbing season so that, you have a tick list? Or I literally have like a checklist that I take people through of like, you're making a plan for your climbing season. How many days do you think you're going to get out? Okay, chop off 2 or 3 of those for weather or random stuff. Okay, now how do we even whatever? And it's all these like little things that I don't necessarily think are captured elsewhere. So it's been a lot less blog energy and a lot more like making slides for courses or like free masterclasses that I've done. So yeah.
And do you enjoy that as much?
I do. And I like talking through things as well. And I think it helps me like give nuance to things. Although I love me some being snarky on the blog on occasion. I try to like
and I'm glad that exists.
Yeah, I'll be nice about it, but I'm also going to like make fun of you. But you'll learn, so it's fine. But yeah, I do miss it. I'm trying to get things recently. Shout out Monica, my assistant Monica. I recently hired an assistant so that I can have more time to make things and not, I don't know, do everything that Monica now does, which was a lot of things. So yeah, that's been cool so that I actually can have time to like make more resources so that I can like reach more people and not just like my athletes or people that are in my programs. So, but I do miss it. I like writing.
Yeah, and you're very good at it.
Thanks. I really appreciate that. You're really good at it too.
my writing, the only kind of writing I really actually like doing is getting angry and just ranting for 15 minutes and then pressing publish and being done, And
they're going, dear editor, will you make this a little nicer so I can put it in a nice book for people to read?
That's exactly how it happened. I do love that. No, actually, I really like writing as well, but it's also a thing that I don't have a ton of time to do. And I've found these other things I really love. And I'm glad you're finding things that you love within this and that you feel good about pouring your energy into, because running your own business is this like, it's talked about in some strange ways, I think, where it's like either talked about super flowery or it's talked about as if it's this hellish thing.
Yeah.
And I think it can be either of those, but it can also be a mix of the two where you're like, okay, I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to do this thing that's a nightmare for me, but I know it has to get done. And I have this other thing I really enjoy doing that now can also help me make money or help me spread my message or whatever it is. And I think it's really important to have both of those things in the mix so that, you're more effective long-term for the people you're trying to serve.
Totally. And I feel like the cool thing about entrepreneurship, like you're never going to get it right. And you can always be kind of like recreating, how you want your schedule to be or whatever. But I feel like the cool thing is that you can keep playing with it. And maybe you won't be able to change your whole business immediately. But if there's something where you're like, I don't like that, you can like figure out a way to change it so that it just becomes more, you're doing more of what you like and less of what you don't. And like, it's going to take, probably like investing in help or like playing with it, but
totally
you can do it. So you have the power. But yeah, I feel like no one ever talks about like that it can just be this in-between place where maybe you're like, I don't love how this is going now, but I know I can change it or upgrade it or whatever.
Yeah, there's lots of nuance, lots of gray area in there, lots of room to explore, and play around. And this is still a little baby industry, really.
Yeah.
So, we're all taking part in the growing of it and creating of it. So exploring within that framework is really fun, actually.
Yeah, totally. It's been a good time. And I feel like I kind of I was thinking about this today. Like, I feel like some parts of the year I try to make it so I'm a rock climber who owns a business. And then other parts of the year, I'm a business owner that rock climbs.
Yeah,
so
smart.
Yeah.
Smart. And, that kind of brings me to this question I had of like, when I started Power Company as a business, I had years of progression as a rock climber. I had done a lot of the things I wanted to do as a rock climber. So I felt like I had all this energy to put toward the business. You're still relatively young in your progression as a climber.
Totally.
And I mean that in a way that I think there's a lot more progression for you, not in like, oh,
you suck.
you're this noob climber. It's more like, I think, you're a good climber, and I think there's a lot more to come. How do you feel like you're exploring those next levels in your climbing? Is it, and I'm sure it's got to be colored by the fact that you're a coach, that you're on social media, that people are looking to you for advice. How does that end up in your practice? Is it more an exploration of different types of climbing and experiences, or how much do you get trapped in the numbers game? Because numbers are a big part of climbing, and it's very hard to separate that from, I'm a coach, I'm supposed to climb such and such number.
Yeah. Oh, this is a good question, Chris. We could dig into this one. So yeah, something that I kind of always joke with people about this, because I have gotten some eyebrows raised. They're like, "You've only been climbing for 7 years. How can you be a climbing coach?" Like, no one ever says that, and I probably am just projecting a little bit. But I have seen people be like, "Oh, I've climbed longer than you, and
Sure.
somehow whatever." I'm like, great, good talk. But so that's kind of one of the things that I always joke. I'm like, I'm a great coach to have because I remember being weak. I remember the day I did my first pull-up when I was 20, and I was psyched about it. And when you do your first pull-up, I'm going to send you so much confetti because I will also be so psyched for you. And I feel like, I definitely think of it as an advantage because I didn't start climbing when I was super young. Like I've very recently gone through a lot of the progressions that many of my athletes are going through as well. So I kind of feel like it's an advantage, and I'm so excited for them because I remember that I was joking about it in the fall, but I was like, so many people have sent their first 512s. I feel like I've sent my first 512 again. I don't need to send anything. I feel like I've sent a bunch of stuff. It's kind of funny. So there's that aspect, but yeah, as far as progression, I've kind of been joking about this. So yeah, as this is being recorded, I am working on, when I was a young girl, I had me a cowboy, which will hopefully be my first 13A if all goes according to plan. But it is kind of weird going on a climbing trip as someone where people kind of I still am no one cares. You're still going to be a good coach either way. But it is kind of this weird thing where I'm like, oh, I mean, yeah, it's me wanting to do it for my own climbing, and also it's kind of in a bouldery style that I've never really done before. So it's an expansion of skills there. So yeah, I guess I'll just dig into why I chose this as well. I've always had kind of I'll say I had a power problem because the Red River Gorge and also my own training style just had me doing tons of endurance. So I kind of have over the past year sort of tried to reverse that, and now I'm picking a pretty powerful rock climb to work on. So that's been personal development for sure. But then also it's kind of this weird thing where I'm like, this rock climb is also kind of a resume bullet point a little bit. So yeah, and I understand. I understand why. And I coach athletes that are much, much stronger than I am. And, it doesn't mean I can't do it, but I think it is important that the more I expand and grow as a climber, the more I'll be able to help my own athletes expand as well.
Yeah, I think it can be both.
Yeah.
This isn't an either or kind of a question. It's not like, oh, if you climb 513, it's either completely attached to the number and it's a bullet point on your resume, or you're doing it for yourself and it's for the experience. It can absolutely be in the middle. It can be both things at the same time.
Yeah. I don't see when people are like, I'm not inspired by, sorry, everyone's going to be real mad at me, but they're like, I'm not inspired by grades. I just do it for the climbs. And I'm like, I think it's fine if you, want to work towards something that the universe would objectively say is harder than anything you've ever done. I mean, with this rock climb, I can feel that it is objectively harder than any rock climb I've ever done, but also that's part of what inspires me. But also I like the rock climb. I tried, like, the first, like, 10 days I was here, I tried 3 or 4 different 13As. I can't remember now. But whatever. I sampled a bunch of them, and I was like, I like this one the best. This is the one I like. The other ones are cool, but I'm like, this one feels the most doable, and I really enjoy the movement, and I'm stoked. But, yeah, I wouldn't have just picked one of the other ones because it felt even harder or whatever. Like, yeah. It's just funny. I'm like, you can be inspired by both things. But I would also recommend that if you're going to go in deep on rock climb, that you kind of like it as well.
Totally. I think it's really... I think everyone should, at some point, really spend some time trying to parse out their motivations for climbing.
Mm-hmm.
And all those people who say grades aren't important are full of shit. You know? That's really all it comes down to. I think we can place way too much importance on them.
Totally.
But they are important. Are they a perfect system? No. And actually, I've spent a fucking lot of time trying to imagine a better system. But there's pitfalls because we're humans and we're gonna place importance in different places. You know.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to struggle with that a little bit. And I'd also say there are times when I'm gonna spend a lot of time and energy on a rock climb I don't fucking like.
Yeah.
And maybe it's for the grade. Maybe it's just because it challenges me in a certain way. And I really like being challenged. And I can find the value in saying, wow, I fucking hate this rock climb. It probably is going to be good for me.
Yeah. You're like, I don't like the climb, but I like that I will learn something from it. And I can remind myself that this is what I need. You know, this is going to help me later on. And then maybe eventually after you do the thing, you'll get better at it and then you might like it more. But yeah, no, you got to like, yeah, I like that. That's very important. I have done rock climbs where I'm like, I don't even like this that much, but I know that I suck at it and then I need to learn from it. So
yeah. And that's just another example of the gray area, because some people are like, I'll only climb rock climbs that are 5 stars and I love them and they look amazing and I choose them for their beauty, you know? And I'm like, yeah, me too, except for half the time I'm going to climb shit that's terrible and looks horrible just because I want to climb everything. And sometimes I'm going to climb it or I'm going to try it because there's a number attached to it that I really want to use as a gauge of my progress, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So climb for all the reasons, I think.
Yeah, and have seasons where you climb for different reasons or change it up. I'm already kind of like starting to formulate, you know, what I want to do in the red, and I'm like, we're switching it up. We're going on a volume rampage. There will be probably no projecting, and I think that'll be fine. We'll see if where we net out on that. But I'm already like, this sounds like a fun challenge where it's like, let's see how much 512 of different styles I can rack up while I'm there, which like will also be kind of fun. Plus we're going the first 2 weeks of October and it might be hot.
Yeah,
so,
it might be 100 degrees.
Yeah, but
it was definitely
schedule, blah blah blah. So we're going. But
it was definitely 100 degrees there on October 5th 2 years ago.
It was 85 on October 18th last year. I'm just like, we'll find the shade. It'll be fine.
Yeah, I'm gonna pose a scenario, and I'm just curious your way that you handle it. So you're planning this volume trip to the red.
Yeah.
But you're planning that based on, I want to get my project done here in Lander.
Yep.
What if you don't send here in Lander? Does that change your plans for the red?
It might. Yeah, it very well might. But I also think I would still change my approach for the red and say, like, try to rack up at least, like, maybe it would be more of a mix. And I would maybe pick, okay, this is what I do. This is the compromise. So I would probably have a 513 picked out, but then I would pick, like, 1 or 2 12B through 12D. Doesn't really matter, but I'd pick 1 or 2 of those and say, like, let's rack that up first before I go in too deep and make that like the first priority before going into that. And part of that is because I feel like the Red River Gorge, especially if you pick, you know, like in the Mother Lode where it's like everything is semi-similar or something like that, where like, you know, if you do well on one rock climb, progressing to the next one might like lead in a little bit better. Whereas I feel like in Lander, at least, like I had that idea, but then I'm like, man, all these things are so different, and a lot of figuring out a project, especially with, or not especially with this one, but with this one, it definitely felt like it was 3 or 4 sessions where it's like, we got to get this beta like figured out. And it doesn't necessarily feel like that would translate to other rock climbs, because then it would be like, and we're on to this new thing that has a bunch of other weird beta that will also take a long time to figure out. So I think that would be my hybrid plan, where it's like, we got to have a primary goal, second tier goals, but we actually have to make sure that we're doing that. So, and it also would change how September goes as well, because September is kind of my like training prep month for the red, and I still think I could like make it down to Lander to try to like give it one last go and not interfere with training too much. But like, it does matter, you know, you want to say like, oh, just like do both, but like it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Like,
and I pose that scenario simply because as a coach, it's something you're going to run into with a client.
Totally.
Who, you know, all of these great plans can be laid out, but it doesn't mean they're all going to go that way. In fact, they aren't going to go that way. So you're going to have to shift gears and talk people through, here's why I think this, and here's why you should do this if you're psyched on this, you know. And there's just going to be a lot of that kind of conversation, like we've, you know, mentioned in this conversation a bunch of times.
Totally. And a lot of people are like sometimes so overwhelmed that like having me help them set goals or just like ask questions like, what are you excited about? Or like one of my favorite questions is like, how do you want to feel at the end of the trip? Like, how do you want to feel? Like, not what do you want to have done? And then like you kind of like walk it back from there, and then we're kind of able to figure out like, this might be a good way. Or sometimes people are just not ready. I think we talked about this before, but like outcome goals where it's like, I want to send this and this and that, or having a tick list is just like, they're just not there yet. And like, we got to just set process goals and be like, you're going to get on 5 rock climbs a day. And like, let's just try to set that too. So there's always a way to like reel it in if you're like, the pressure of an outcome goal is just like not conducive to my life right now.
Yeah, totally. How much as a business owner, and as a coach, again, who people are, you know, looking to for advice, how much are you scheduling out like, this is my climbing time, this is my business time, and how much are you allowing how much room are you allowing for your motivation in those individual like seasons that you've created for yourself? I'm curious.
I think, this is a really good question. So I'm pretty big on scheduling things out far in advance. And part of that is just that I've literally noticed that if you can be, you know, on your game and look at Airbnbs like 6 months before you're going to roll up, you're just going to get a way better deal. Totally. Honestly. So that's kind of part of it, where we just like schedule things pretty far in advance. So that's one thing. So yeah, I would say that I kind of have, you know, where things are going sort of mapped out like 6 months out ish. And I kind of have like a general, like I drive my other half, Michael, crazy. It's January, and I'm like, I think this is what our whole year is going to be. And he's just like, it's January. We just moved here. And I'm like, no, this is when our training season's going to be, and this is our performance. He's like, okay, that's what we're doing, I guess. And I'm like, that's what we're doing. Good talk. So like, yeah, I think I had everything. I probably have a note in my phone where I like mapped out my whole thing in January. And I've never really had, like, this is going to sound weird, I have had moments of like lack of motivation or just feeling really tired, but that's also part of why I have realized that I like need to have a coach for accountability myself, because I know it's going to happen. Yeah, but I will say the first time, I've always been pretty motivated to rock climb, but that's because usually I'm like deprived of the amount of time outside that I actually want. But after I sent my project in the red last November, I was like, I don't want to rock climb at all. And I still have like a week and a half. And then I'm also just still going to be around Ohio. Like I could still climb through December. We built a home wall in my parents' basement and I like barely touched it. And I think, yeah, that was the first time I've ever felt like completely unmotivated to rock climb. And that was kind of weird for me. I mean, I also realized, I'm like, it's probably because you just started a business and you're preparing to move your whole life across the country. Right. So yeah, I don't. Let's see. Now I'm
and
like,
I think motivation doesn't necessarily have to just disappear. You know, it can also change. For instance, after I did my first 14A, I immediately thought, okay, and this is what I had planned. Like I'm going to do 14A, and then I want to chase some big wall goals.
Oh, wow.
But then as soon as I did it and I started talking about the big wall goals, I started to be more like, I'd kind of rather boulder.
We'll just go with the small ones, actually.
let's go from the biggest walls to the tiniest little rocks.
Yep.
So that's where I went, despite having talked about it in a public way.
Oh,
and
wow.
I just followed that motivation. And, when we went to Australia, one of my, the initial reason I wanted to go to Australia was to climb on the Taipan wall. I really want to climb on this wall. It's world class. I've heard so much about it. I know the history of it. And when I got there, I was like, okay, I do want to climb on the Taipan wall, but mostly I want to boulder. So I'm going to go climb on it. I'm going to go get scared. I'm kind of craving getting scared on a rope, but I'm not going to put any time into trying to send anything.
Yeah.
And that felt totally okay. And I think that's something that's relatively new to me, where in the past I was more of I'm going to schedule my whole year out. This is what I will do. When I finish a thing, I'll look at my schedule and say, what do I do next? And now I've gotten a little more lax about that. Yes, there are some things totally scheduled out, written on the whiteboard. You have to do these in this time period.
Yep.
And I will do that. But I'm also like, one of my goals is to climb V12. And if I don't feel like trying V12 right now, I'm not going to try it. I'd rather go climb on new boulders or, or work on new podcast ideas or whatever. I'm just letting my motivation lead me wherever.
Yeah. Oh, it's kind of funny that you say that, because I kind of am planning. I'm assuming that by the time I've hopefully gone pretty hard here and at the red, that by November I'm going to be like, who wants some turkey? And I told my friend Kyle, because he's excited that me and Mike moved to Salt Lake, but he's also really into trad climbing, and so we've just been sport climbing a lot. And he's like, man, I want trad partners, guys. And I shook Kyle's hand and I was like, all November, you can take me trad climbing as much as you want. I will follow the things. I will clean out the cracks. We'll have a great time. I will learn how to hand jam finally. It'll be a good time. So I'm kind of just planning on November being skills exploratory fun month. So hopefully that works out. Maybe I won't be psyched at all. Maybe I won't ever try to climb. I have no idea, but we'll see. But I've gone up one crack in Little Cottonwood Canyon, and it was pretty fun. So I'm kind of ready for more. And plus then there's no pressure either. I'm just going to learn a lot, and it's going to be a good time. So it's cool to be able to have time for a fun month of just being a goober and learning how to do something new. So
yeah, and honestly, this sort of plays off of that imposter syndrome that I think a lot of people feel at not having climbed a certain number or whatever. But frankly, I personally like the idea of just having a wider skill set and more experiences and different perspectives about rock climbing. For me, that's more important than you've climbed a specific grade, because frankly, to be able to climb the harder grades, you almost have to be really self-involved. You have to narrow your focus. You have to take this really narrow perspective. Doesn't mean you've done it your whole life, but having only climbed 7 years, if that was all of your focus was, I just want to climb this hard grade, how effective then can you be for the people who aren't having that same experience in their climbing?
Right. Totally. And then you're just going to be frustrated when your athletes don't have defined goals and they're just I just want to have more fun on my Red Rocks trip. And if you are but why wouldn't you have the route picked out, then,
right.
You're going to be frustrated. But if you can understand that getting out or being able to just have long days is the goal, then yeah, totally agree. And it's fun to just live somewhere where I can have a lot of different experiences too and not get pigeonholed into certain styles. It's crazy. I'm and now that I have flexibility of location, I'm I could go on trips where I just go learn a new style. My friend Carly keeps trying to get me to go on a trip to El Salto so I can learn how to climb on tufas. And I'm like, that sounds pretty fun. Like, I could do that. I could just like go on trips to learn things.
Yeah, it's an interesting new paradigm to be able to move around, do this thing you love while you're also working. It took me a while to really understand that, where it used to be I'm taking time off work to go on a climbing trip. Now it's like, oh, we could kind of go anywhere we want, anytime we want. This is weird.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, and I guess for context for anyone listening, my other half works in oncology healthcare. So he works completely remotely now, which is really sweet. And we're able to kind of do what we want, but it hasn't always been like this. There was a lot of years where it was long distance and definitely not doing what we want. So yeah.
Totally. Are there any big standout kind of lessons, ideas, new things that you've gotten, whether it's from continuing education, whether it's from unexpected things from clients, whatever it is? Are there any big standout things that you've carried with you so far?
I think I've gotten just a lot better at being not only willing to take feedback, but also excited about it. I would say that's a really big one. Like when I first started coaching, this is in like a few different ways. So when I first started coaching, I hardly took videos of myself. And my business coach, Chelsea, was like, Lauren, how can you expect your athletes to send you videos of them climbing so you can help them if you won't even take videos of yourself and share them? And I was like, ooh, you're right. I really need to do that. And I was very scared to like share videos of myself climbing on social media, especially because it was a major imposter syndrome thing. I was so afraid people were going to be like, this girl's footwork sucks. How could she coach a person? And for the most part, everyone's been cool about it. There was one dude who sent me a really mean Instagram message, and it kind of made me cry, but I still got my training session done. But yeah.
Sadly, this doesn't fucking surprise me.
Yeah. So that sucked. But other than that, everyone's been pretty nice. And you know what? A lot of people are like, nice work on that moonboard problem, Lauren. And I'm like, oh, the internet doesn't have to be a totally hellish place, I guess. So.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be totally hellish, but there are some aspects of it that kind of fucking suck.
Yeah.
And when like I had a conversation with Shelma Junn years ago, who's now a good friend of mine, and when we first talked, she really she was basically giving me a handout by having this conversation with me, because I didn't quite understand. And I would hear women talk about mansplaining, which was a new term at the time, and I'm like, yeah, but I've had dudes like come up to me and give me beta and shit like that too. So this happens to everybody, but it definitely doesn't happen to me as much as it happens to female coaches who are out there on the internet. What's that experience been like for you, especially as a new coach, who didn't come from a like world-class competitor background or something like that? What's that been like, dealing with dudes on the internet?
In the beginning, it was really scary, and I don't regret the time that I spent sobbing in the shower over like mean shit people said to me on the internet, but I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. I think I'm pretty much over it at this point. Maybe someone will come at me with something really eloquent in the future. But it was really hard and scary at first, but I kind of always would come back and remind myself, like some people recommend like having an in case you need this file on your phone where you keep like nice things your athletes have said to you. So you can remind yourself like, fuck the haters. I have helped a lot of people, and if I curl into a ball in my bed, then I will stop helping people over something some dumb dude on the internet said. So it kind of, that's been super grounding. But now I think it's happened enough times that I kind of think it's funny, to the point where I am starting a folder, and I was like, Monica, if anyone sends me anything mean, you just screenshot it, you put it in this folder, and then I'm going to make fun of everyone later. So watch out, people. So it's been a good shift. And I also think it just has come from the confidence of being like, I've coached a lot of athletes at this point. A lot of people have done pretty well. And it's been a year since quitting, a corporate engineering job, but I'm still coaching rock climbers. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of just like getting better about it. But yeah, and it's also, I used to engage, and now I'm kind of at the place where I'm like, I don't owe anyone my response to anything.
Totally.
And I think what you said sucked. I just block you. Or whatever. So
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not engaging with this like garbage.
That's
getting
actually
blocked.
a lesson I've had to learn because I really fucking love engaging.
I know you do.
Like it's one of my biggest joys in life actually is when there's some hater on the internet and I get to engage with them and my wife can see it. She's like, I see a twinkle in your eye. Get off the internet, But I've had to learn that my time just is more valuable than dealing with these idiots.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you're not giving them the time.
No.
Giving them your energy.
No more. I used to because I was like, oh, well, maybe I did say something wrong or I should have done this better. And now I'm like, no. And also I feel like everyone needs, this is just a PSA about social media. When coaches are talking about social media, they're probably talking about like 90% of the time when this is what they see, but there's always going to be like a little bit where maybe what they're saying doesn't exactly apply to you, but you don't need to come after them and eat everyone alive over it. Maybe just like be a human that's like, oh, this person's trying to give applicable information to literally thousands of people. And if you want one size fits all information, then like, why not get a consult? Like,
right. Yeah, definitely a real thing that we have to look at posts on social media and say, this falls somewhere in this spectrum of white to black with all this gray area in between. But it's not trying to say it fits every situation.
No. Usually it's like, here's some tips and ideas. There's a bunch more, but here's a good place to start maybe. Yeah. It's kind of funny. So that's been interesting. I guess other things I've definitely, so taking feedback is certainly a big thing that I've learned.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of, I was really proud of myself yesterday because I was out at the crag and like working on the project and someone came up to me and they were, most people when they want to like spray bait at you or give you advice, they just kind of like start saying it and that's when it kind of sucks. And this person was like, hey, I'm wondering if you're open to some feedback. Yeah. And I was like, you seem really nice, and the fact that you asked like that seems pretty cool. I later found out he was from Ohio, and we have Ohio radar, so I was like, I could tell I liked you. But yeah, he gave me really good advice. He was like, seems like you're not breathing at all. And I was like, that's fair. I don't think I am. And then my friend Carly was also out there and she, she's a coach too. So she was giving me some feedback and she was like, we've talked about breathing. I'm like, we've talked about breathing. And then it was to the point where I was like so grateful to have this feedback that my next burn, I just looked at everyone around at the crag and I was like, so I'm going to breathe like I'm a rocket ship today. I'm going to go when I breathe out. Like I literally said that. I was like, I'm going to be rocket ship mode on this burn. I don't think this is going to be a send burn. So I really just want to like actively work on this. And if any of you guys don't hear me breathing, I want you to heckle me. And I think like maybe 2 years ago, I would not have been so receptive to getting feedback like this. But now I'm like, this is what's going to help me send. Like, friggin' yell at me to breathe. I don't care. Like, let's go. And I was like open with being like, I'm actively making this mistake. And I want everyone to help me do it. But also I think it's fun. And I did breathe like a rocket ship for a lot of it. And it did feel better. Everyone should breathe more. In and out, people.
This just makes me want to make a little video of a rocket ship with your rocket ship sound effect behind it. I really need this in my life now.
Yeah, it sounds, I can do the rocket ship noise again if you need to sample it. So it's fine.
It was a quiet, calm rocket ship.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, feedback is super important, and I've posted multiple times about people spraying beta on the internet, and there's always some idiot.
I know what you're gonna say.
Who's like,
but
but
feedback.
this is social time, and I'm like, if this is your only method of being social, then you have some things you need to work through.
Yeah,
and there's always the people who think I'm just trying to be helpful. And that's great.
Yeah.
Consider being helpful. And the best way to do that is to ask if the person wants help first, So I think that's a great way to approach it, and I'm glad this person did that.
Yeah.
You know,
He crushed the feedback giving. And I've had a lot of bad experiences with men saying like non-awesome things to me without asking for any sort of consent. And also that's not helpful. It was like not good advice anyways. Like, yeah.
Yeah,
this was the way to do it.
When I was climbing at RockQuest a lot in Cincinnati, there was an MMA fighter in town who, I can't remember his name. He was like world champion MMA fighter, and he would bring all his friends in, other MMA fighters, to climb at the gym.
Oh my God.
And I was watching him try to climb this like V2 steep thing one day, and it was painful to watch, you know.
Yeah.
Doing literally all the wrong things. And I sat there for a while, and finally I was like, "Hey, do you want some help with that?" And I give him some help, and then he does the problem, and he's like, "Have you been sitting there the whole time not giving me help?" And I was like, yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked. And I'm like, okay, good. You know.
I had more fun campusing it and whatever.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to my old way now.
Yeah. So, you know, it can be really helpful for some people. And some people just don't want beta for whatever reason. So
yeah.
Asking is definitely the best option to start with.
Yeah. And I always like warn people. I'm always like, hey, I'm a climbing coach. You just let me know if I'm going into coach mode, if when I'm talking to you about this, and I will like step off because like it's just my job. So, but yeah, I try to be pretty. I also like to not let people know I'm a climbing coach at the crag. It just kind of adds this like, I know it's kind of silly, but I feel like it adds this weird stress where, I don't know. That's been another weird thing to deal with when people are like, what do you do for work? And they're like just slaying whatever I was rock climbing. And I'm like, coach rock climbers, but you just keep doing what you're doing, bud.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of weird. Because then they kind of look at you and they're like, but I'm like, you don't get it. It's fine. Keep climbing.
Yeah. And there are times like, you know, 90% of the time I'm like, I don't want to steal the struggle from a person because I know there's some learning happening right now.
Yeah.
But then there are a lot of times like that instance in RockQuest where it's a little painful for me to watch. And I'm like, I know I could help them learn this if I had the opportunity to say one thing.
Yeah.
You know? So if that's you, if you're that person who feels the need, you know, to say something, first, examine why you feel the need to say it.
Yeah.
Is it about you or is it about helping someone? And is it going to help them if you say it? You know, I hear a lot of shit just sprayed around at the crag that isn't helpful at all.
No.
So check yourself a little bit and then
Yeah.
ask and be polite about it instead of just assuming you're the expert in the situation.
Totally. Ooh, I have to share my favorite. I think this is my favorite internet beta spray I have received ever. So when I was working on Jesus Wept, I was like doing one of the first boulder problems with like a foot cutting dyno. I didn't want it to be this way, guys. I wanted to be able to do it statically, but I had just come off a left-hand finger injury and crimps weren't working out. And I was like, jumping is what we will do. This is how it's going to be. I've spent 4 sessions. And this guy DMs me and goes, hey, I saw a video of another girl doing it statically. Like, I think you can do it statically. And I was like, are we all the same height? That's so weird. I didn't know we were all the same height.
All women are exactly the
We're
same.
all the same.
Yeah.
I didn't. Thank you so much for telling me.
You're basically Yanya.
Yeah, we're all the same. We all have everything about us. If you're a girl, you climb like this, right? It was wild. I was like, do you read what you're saying? I'm like, I lost it. I was kind of mad at the time, but now I'm like, this is so funny. Like, oh my God.
Everybody's an expert on the internet.
Totally.
Because your business model is based a lot around social media.
Yeah, totally.
Have there been times, well, I'm sure there have been times where the people saying things make you want to not be on social media? And how do you like keep raising the bar of what you're doing on social media? Because it has ramped up quite a bit. and I enjoy watching the progression of it. So how do you talk yourself into continuing to build on there when it's easily one of the places where you become a target?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. I mean, well, first of all, I can like definitively tell you that I would say a lot of my sales are driven from social
Sure.
media. So that's just kind of a reality that you have to deal with. I will say having like outsourcing some of it or coming up with systems to make my time on social media more intentional has been pretty important. I've literally invested in like how to like courses on like making me better at this. So that's been cool too. And then I've also just kind of realized that talking about what I'm actually inspired to talk about, because like, of course, you know, have a list 1,000 miles long of topics that I want to talk about. And sometimes I'm like, nope, this happened recently and I'm just going to like speak about this or educate about this right now because that's what's relevant. So I think sticking with things where I have like good energy around it, where I want to talk about it has been really helpful. And then also just like outsourcing stuff to people. Like I am not good at design. I am not good at designing things. I remember asking you about like all your graphics on Instagram and I'm like, do you do that yourself? And you're like, yeah. And I'm like, this will never be me. I make like an ugly version of the thing and then I send it to Monica. And I'm like, Monica, turn this crazy graph I thought of that is Scrabble into like a thing that the world can look at. So I think like learning what I like and what I'm good at and then trying to like outsource as much of the rest of it is important. And the other thing I realized is that like I don't use my personal social media at all. Like I'm just kind of like social media is work now. I've tried to kind of communicate to my friends. I'm like, hey, if you want to talk to me on Instagram, maybe just text me because this is kind of like you texting my business inbox when like I'm going through my own like business Instagram. So that kind of helps. Yeah. And then also I've sort of come to this realization, like now I love it when people unfollow me. I'm like, good. If you weren't here for bad puns, you got to get out of here. Like you're not going to like the rest of it.
Right.
So just realizing like that when people leave, you're like, good. Because if you didn't think that was fun, you're not going to like what's coming next. So.
Yeah. And you're not trying to, like the whole point isn't to have 50 million followers.
No.
The point is to have whatever the number of followers is who wants the information you're putting out there,
Yeah,
who wants to engage
you,
with it, who wants to be this intentional community with you. You know?
Exactly. And
That's-
I'm like, if
that's
you don't
the
like
point.
how I explain things or you don't like my philosophies about stuff, well, like there's a lot of other coaches and that's why there are multiple coaches is because you should go find someone else.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said, you know, when you were talking about the graphics and things like that, you said, so I do the things I like to do. You know, I think that's really important. And I think it's overlooked a lot when talking about business is it would absolutely be easier for me if I outsourced making those little graphs.
Yeah.
But because I enjoy doing it, I do it.
Yeah.
You know, if it's something I don't enjoy doing, generally speaking, I will learn how to do it and then I outsource it.
Yep.
You know, I want to understand it enough to have an intelligent conversation with the person I'm asking to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but then I don't want to do it anymore.
Yep.
You know, and it's been really important for me to find the things that I like doing so that when I'm not enjoying doing part of what I do, I can switch to this other thing that I really like doing and it recharges my batteries, you know, like these conversations do, like making those graphs do, that are coming up with new podcast ideas or new product ideas. I like that exploration and I could pay somebody to do a lot of that, but it's the part I like.
Right.
So I keep it in.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that totally makes sense. Yeah. I think like learning how to like keep, and it's also been like, you know, it's scary. You're like, it's your first year in business. And I'm like, I think I need help because if I don't get help, I'm just going to keep doing tons of stuff that takes me forever because I'm bad at it. It's just not the part of my business that I like need to be doing. But I also think it helps to like do it yourself first, to your point, so that you know, oh, this is what takes me forever and I do not like it. And then when someone's like, this is how much it costs to get help with it, you're like, sick. That's so much, like it's worth even more to me than that. So take my money.
Exactly. You already know that it takes this level of expertise, and you can say, okay, I understand why it's worth that money.
I'm like, you can do that, and I will gladly pay you for it. So
yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming over, taking the time. You're a business owner. It's busy. Life is busy, and you got a project waiting.
It's crazy.
But I also, in a world where there are lots of coaches coming into this, I appreciate that you are out there doing it, engaging with it, exploring it, in all of its facets, because I think that's the best way to be effective, is to understand what your clients are going through. And I'm really excited to see you doing that and to see where it goes for you. I feel like whether it's warranted or not, I feel like this pioneer in this industry, and it really excites me to see other people coming in with gusto, and not being like, oh, I have to follow this business model exactly. I can play around with it and make it my own. That's really important for me to see, because then I know it's in good hands moving forward. So I appreciate you being here.
Thanks. I appreciate you creating an industry where I don't have to be a grumpy corporate slave, and I can coach rock climbers and live if you would have told me in college that this is where I would be however many years later, I would have told you were nuts. But now it's pretty crazy. So yeah, and I appreciate your podcast is one of the things that got me started even caring about training. So yeah, it's pretty surreal. I know I think I said this the other day, but I was like, 4 years ago I was just on a way to a job that I didn't like listening to training podcasts, and now I own a business and I'm on one. It's pretty weird.
Yeah, and that's why I do it. I hope that someone listens to this. There's some young person somewhere in the Midwest who's like, oh, I relate to this. Yeah. And I really love this idea, and I'm gonna explore this and see where it goes. And they create a whole new model of doing this.
Totally.
And, that will make me more excited than anything. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I've said it before in other places. I've said it on the podcast here during our Hard Truth episodes, and I'll say it again now. I absolutely love Lauren's energy, and I'm so happy that she's here in this industry. Right now, you can head over to Lauren's website. You can find the link right there in your show notes in your pocket supercomputer. And using the code GOODSPRAY, all one word, all caps, you can get 20% off of any of Lauren's self-guided programs until the end of December. That's Crush It Bouldering, Crush It Sport Climbing, and Force Over Time. Use the code GOODSPRAY, one word, all caps. Also, Lauren has one custom plan opening. You can start that anytime in the next 2 months, so hit her up via her website and get in on that. And of course, as always, you can find links to follow Lauren on the social medias right there in the show notes in your pocket supercomputers. Okay, I mentioned in the beginning that we've got some new podcasts coming, some new podcasts joining the PLUGTONE Audio Collective. First up, Switchback, an outdoor community podcast hosted by Kelsey Keitel, who is an outdoor-based counselor, licensed educator, and adventure leader from Indiana. Kelsey is pretty much the opposite of me. Instead of trying to rattle people, she is incredibly soothing. And I love listening to her interviews with folks as she processes the reality that the outdoors may not be the great equalizer that we think it is. Switchback is 4 episodes deep right now. She also has a bonus episode out that I really, really enjoyed. Curiosity Killed the Criticism. You can find links to that show as well as that particular episode right there in your show notes. Also, last one for today. Devin and I have been working with Lauren, today's guest, and Caitlin Holmes, who you may know on the Instagrams as Dirtbag Nutritionist, to get a brand new podcast from them up and running. It's going to be called The Average Climber Podcast. You'll be hearing more in early 2022. However, if you're listening to this today, Lauren and Caitlin will be going live on Instagram at 10 a.m. to announce their podcast and talk a little more about what you can expect from it. I'm excited to have their energy in this space as well. All right, you guys know where to find us. You're not new to this. The Instagrams, the Facebooks, the Pinterests, the YouTubes. Check out our community forum, community.powercompanyclimbing.com. We'd love to have your voice weighing in over there. The more the merrier. However, it's not as merry on the Twitters because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time, power, this time to build, power, this time to build, power, this time to build, power. This time to build 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 power. This time to build. 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 This time. Cause job is the sinister character.
PLUGTONE audio.